Hi, my name's Crosmatron or Crosmatron, and this is the political compass test. It says 25 years, but I don't know if that logo. It says the political compass 25 years, just under the Adobe Acrobat Studio, and I didn't even know that Adobe Acrobat was still a product in 2026. That's absurd to me, because there's a million PDF programs available, um, and it says free trial. Like you have to pay for their PDF spaces, it says in the ad. Absolutely nonsense. Anyway, so I definitely did this test when it was new, back in whenever it came out. And I had arguments with friends about it because I sent it around my friend group, and they all said like roughly what they answered for each question and so on. And we had some good discussions about it, and we basically came to the conclusion that everybody else had really bad political opinions, and I did not. And but it's strange because like I think I maybe it's just because actually I don't know why, but um for some reason people go, oh, you seem like you'd be like a socialist or something. I've had people say that to me a few times, and it's like, what? Um, yeah. So I I definitely swing the other way usually. So we'll see what happens. And it says before taking the test, please note that this isn't a survey. These aren't questions; they're propositions. Propositions are a very different proposition. To question the logic of individual ones that irritate you is to miss the point. Some propositions are extreme and others are moderate. That's how we show whether you lean towards extremism or moderation on the compass. Your responses should not be overthought. Some of them are intentionally vague. Their purpose is to trigger reactions in the mind, measuring feelings and prejudices rather than detailed opinions on policy. Well, I'm going to go through them like in way more detail than they probably need to be. And also, I think what we'll do is like the first time I go through, I'm just going to legitimately give the answers I believe, and then the second time I'm going to try and give the most right wing answers I can think of. Hopefully, we'll see if I can max it out or something, and see if yeah, we'll just see if that happens. Because I don't know if the first time I run through it, I get quite a right wing an outcome. Maybe that won't make any sense. So we'll see. So definitely English. Okay. Just a few propositions to start with concerning no less how you see the country and the world. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. Well, no. Wait, what? If economic globalization is inevitable, well, it's not. This is the problem. They're all loaded questions. That's why they call them propositions. What they mean really is that they're all leading or loaded in one way or another, which means that they're like in a court, the judge would say this is bullshit, because like it's really not inevitable. So it's asking me something that doesn't make sense, but it's like, would you beat your wife type thing. Um, no, sorry, it's not. Not would you beat your wife. Uh, when did you start beating your wife? Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, maybe you should stop beating your wife already. Like, stop it. Seriously, I'm not. I'm being serious. Anyway, if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity than the interests of transnational corporations. I don't think humanity's interests should be um like this is we're talking about economics, pure economics, which means that I don't think it should be thought about in a humanistic context. Actually, really, I know that a lot of economics experts think it should, but I to me that doesn't make sense. So I'm saying actually that I disagree with this quite a lot, and I think it's a dumb question. Right. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. Mm, strongly disagree. I guess. I guess that means I'm not a nationalist or something, right? That's probably a bad answer. Uh, no one chooses their country of birth. So it's foolish to be proud of it. Well, the thing is, it's I disagree with this because people associate ethnicity and culture a lot, right? So like there is a through line of genetic and ethnic information that passes through because when you teach the new generation about the old ways through the media and so on, and that means that actually, and genetically you're similar as well. So that means that like the people who fought in World War II for your country, say, you are similar to them in many ways, in very many ways. And if you are proud of them for doing that, then you almost can be proud of yourself because you are basically the same person. You're just mixed together, right? So, um, what I'm saying is that, like, I think you can be proud of it. It's not foolish. I strongly disagree that it's foolish. So maybe that's what I should tick. Oh god. It's not letting me tick it now. It broke. It broke. It's because of the ads, isn't it? Okay, we're just gonna right. If no, strongly disagree. Uh, no. If they go completely off the deep end, you don't have to support them. Okay, you really like say if they turn full communist, you don't have to support them. Okay. Uh, I strongly disagree that it's foolish. Our race has many superior qualities. Okay, now we've got. Oh shit! Now we're getting real questions. Okay, I'm gonna put. I think like if you want to get like this is a hard question, but I think um honestly every that like I'm not going to go into any specifics, but I think like probably, but um you know I don't want to say what they are, but I would think so. I would say it's also true for everybody else. So it's I'm not claiming anybody is better than anybody else by giving this answer. So it's not racist, although I think a lot of people might think it's racist to give this answer, but whatever. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. No, probably not. It depends, because usually there is a third way, right? It's like the old triad thing where you've got like fascism, communism, and liberalism, which are like the three um directions that politics tend to go towards. Um, and so there was this idea, I think, amongst liberals that like Nazis hate communists and liberals hate communists, so liberals like Nazis too. At certain points, I'm referring to a specific thing that happened. Um, so I think that it's incorrect, but I think that a lot of people think that it's correct. I don't think it worked out the way they expected. Uh, Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Strongly agree. The reason I'm putting strongly agree is because international law isn't a thing. Not really. Like it's not as like if you think that things they come up with in the UN, for example, are international law. The other thing is that treaties and things get broken way more often than people admit. Like I don't want to bring up examples, but like yeah, it's hard to argue that there even is any international law of any kind, really. Uh, it's always been more of a might makes right, like and realpolitik sort of situation that goes on here. So I think there is no international law to uh defy, but I'll still put strongly agree because well, if you think there is some minor kind of international law there, then you can always just ignore it whenever you feel like it's basically fine. Um, there is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. Um, I think that this is probably an older question. I don't even know what it's referring to now at this point. I guess it's referring to Discovery Channel and History Channel and so on, where the documentaries are all kind of nonsense and so on. So there is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I don't even think this is true. I think on balance, if you look at the internet, I think that it's not the case really that this is happening in a major way. I'm not worried about. I'm sure people when this test was made, I'm sure lots of people were worried about that, but I don't think it's true anymore. And I strongly disagree anyway. Okay, now the economy. People are unlikely. Sorry, people are ultimately divided more or less by class than by nationality. Well, you know, kind of, but uh, I'm still gonna put disagree on that because I think like people always get culture shock when they go to other places and stuff. I think the idea that you have much affinity with people of the same class in a different nationality, I think is not really the case always. It might be if you're in the West only, but if you're like including other parts of the world, probably you'll have very little in common. Um, Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Well, mm, this one's a toughie because I mean, obviously, you can always, yes. The reason is because if you allow your economy to go completely to hell through inflation, then it kind of whether people are employed or not doesn't even really matter anymore. People can't afford stuff. This happens in like say if you look at Zimbabwe as an example. Um, so I think this is extremely uh like inflation is obviously more important in the grand scheme of things. But they're both important because if unemployment's really high, then like it almost doesn't matter. Like well, thing is, if you had really bad employment, then necessarily inflation would be probably in the negative. I think that would happen if unemployment got terrible. But anyway, let's just skip over that. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they must require regulation. Well, obviously, I think that you have to conserve the environment and everybody. Like the main argument for this is just because I don't want the countryside covered in like plastic. Uh, so I would say strongly agree because it's a shared environment. That's why it's called the environment. It's shared environment. So anyway, I think that's the correct answer for that. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. Um, it's very hard to manage. There's a lot of people, you know. The problem here is that I might be inclined to agree with this, but a lot of people cheat and so on. So I'm gonna say that, and I don't know if the I mean, is this saying I'm trying to work out what this is a reference to because I've heard this quote before, and obviously it's going to be something to do with the welfare state, and like I'm going to put a um. I don't know if the state should be in charge of this answer, which means that I'm going to just put a mild disagree. The free of the market, the free of the people. That usually does go hand in hand a bit because, like, at least in England with liberalism, like liberalism of the people and liberalism of the market actually pretty much just coincided, at least a long time. I would say in the modern, like after that, it's not so much the case. I would say a lot of the old-fashioned ideas of liberalism have kind of been lost in places like Europe, and their markets are still about as free as they were when liberalism first appeared. I would guess. You could probably argue with that. I guess. Well, maybe after the war, things would have freed up slightly more. Maybe, but also there were there were a lot of laws against all sorts of things that were to do with preventing people from doing things that they wanted to that were gotten rid of around the same time. So I'm saying that I'm going to strongly agree because I think there is a big correlation. It's not causation though. I don't think. I think it's just I think it's a symbiotic thing more, but it's not causation. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. No, you buy it. If you bought it, it's your fault. You can't blame. It's not society's fault. It's your fault as an individual every time you buy bottled water that they sell bottled water. That's called supply and demand. So it's not anybody's fault except yours. Like if you buy bottled water and if you complain about it. If you buy bottled water and you don't complain about it, then good for you. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Well, how else are you gonna do it? I don't even know how. Like, I know that, like, it's kind of interesting actually. This is kind of an interesting thing about the Federation in Star Trek, which is that Captain Picard has a massive vineyard, and how, like in France, like in Laval, France, where he's born, he has a massive vineyard, and it's his family's vineyard, which has been passed down for hundreds of years. And it's absolutely absurd that he has access to that because there's so many people in the future on Earth and in the Federation and so on, and he has a massive plot of land to himself, essentially, especially after his um, nephew and his brother die in a fire, and then he has it all to himself. And yeah, so land should be bought and sold because you can't. I mean, how else do you do it? How? It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to the society. I think this does happen, but I largely think that, like, I guess the argument here is about the stock market, right? But you kind of need that level of investment. I don't actually have a better solution. I'm gonna say it's regrettable. Is it regrettable? I don't, man. I don't even know if it is. Oh, well, I'm gonna put agree because I think if we could think of a better solution, then that's fine. Um. Anyway, protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. I think basically everybody agrees with that one secretly. I think so. Um. It's regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's marginally regrettable, but also probably necessary. Uh, the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Yes, of course. It's not their job to improve society in any way. It's their job to, um, if you're a corpo, it's your job to publicly traded corpo. It's your job to provide profit to your shareholders. That's it. I think that's fine. I don't see a problem with that. It always annoys me when they start grandstanding about stuff. The rich are too highly taxed. It depends who we count as rich, right? Because I think we could do with a lot more tax brackets, and then we could have an extra mega rich bracket, which would be taxed probably roughly the same. But then you would also lower the amount of income tax in a bracket that's in the kind of rich but not that rich area. So basically, what I'm calling for is a tax cut, and no, even for the mega rich, I'm not actually like the only thing that like the thing is we already have a progressive tax system, and the rich are taxed a lot. Like, actually, there are people who get around it in various ways, but um, do I think they're taxed too highly? I'm kind of erring towards yes, which isn't a weird answer for me, I guess. I think probably a bit because I'm actually just calling for a tax cut. I've decided we need a tax cut. Um, so, but it's not for the mega rich. It's kind of for the in between. But I don't know if they count. But I'm gonna just say mild agree. Um, those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Yes, of course. I, anyway, governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Yes, I think strongly agree. I think I think historically we've seen that businesses will just say that they have a magic flute that makes all cats live until they're like 50 years old if you blow it in their face, and they will sell that as a product. And even though there's no evidence that it will work, and that's why you need to protect the public because the public is stupid and they will just believe that it works. Um, and they will buy it, and then it won't work, and then the business will make tons of money. And yeah, so basically, every government penalizes businesses that mislead the public anyway. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. I don't know. I'm kind of umming and ahhing about this. I kind of generally a fan of the antitrust type stuff and like regulation of businesses in some ways, but um, predator multinationals, it's just phrasing it in a really mean way. I think like if realistically most well-known companies are just multinationals now that own lots of companies around the globe. And there aren't that many multinationals really that are big. Like there's just a handful, and they own pretty much everything that's significant. Um, so um, we already have lots of restrictions on them growing larger, but we generally don't use them much. Um, but I am also not that bothered by it. Um, this is a difficult one because I'm umming and ahhing on the so- oh god, this is a hard one because I'm not really sure. Hmm. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multi of let's just say should multinationals be allowed to create monopolies? I think the answer to that is yes, because there's a definition of a legal and illegal monopoly that's often used in America, which is whether you are using your monopolistic position to take advantage of the market, which is basically shoving other companies out. And basically, um, it's generally considered okay. Well, the thing is, there also are mechanisms to preemptively stop that happening. Like if multiple large video game companies want to merge or something, then usually they do need to get lots of government approval and stuff in most countries just to make sure that the market's still going to be healthy afterwards. But but I think we have monopolies already, and they do essentially work. So I actually just think if you behave in a way that's improper and you're a monopoly, then I think that's a problem. If you otherwise, I think it's fine. Otherwise, I don't think capitalism is bad and stuff. Okay, right. Now look at some of your personal social takes. Abortion when the woman's life is not threatened should always be illegal. I hate this question because it's very like there's way too much nuance. It shouldn't always be illegal, or should well, okay, okay. It depends because there's cases where I'm trying to think because there's things like preeclampsia and stuff where, well, I guess that does threaten their life. Oh man, this is a hard one, but I'm gonna put a very mild disagree because I think there are other medical cases where you could make the argument. Um, but you know, yeah, if I got a helpful given that answer, we'll just like yeah, just try and ignore I said that. But it's a very tacit disagree. Like not tacit, is that the right word? I don't know, whatever. All authority should be questioned. Um, yeah? No? Wait, what? I don't even know what that means. Okay. I mean, yeah, by somebody. Yeah, not necessarily by me. I think it's like if you're working in the media and you want to make a film that is questioning somebody's authority, then you should be allowed to do that. Which means I'm putting strongly agree, of course. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I think the problem with this approach is that it has to end somewhere. You have to think about like this is too absolutist, right? Because you need a better strategy than this. This is like schoolyard bully way of thinking about it. Oversimplification, which means this doesn't always map onto reality that well. Like people pretend it does, but um, so I'm going to put strongly disagree here because um, yeah, if I go to well, I just don't. I think it's. I think you need to do it on a case by case basis. That's what I mean. That's why I put strongly disagree. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. I think preserving things is generally a good idea. I think it's good and healthy for society just generally. And we spend taxpayer money so poorly anyway that I think this is one of those things where it's mostly a good idea. So I'm going to say disagree. That they should be expected to do it. Although I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna put strongly disagree. I've decided. Okay. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. They're all worded backwards too, and that's starting to piss me off. Because this is a negative again. Why aren't they positive questions? Schools should make classroom attendance compulsory. Jeez. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. So, if I put agree, that means I'm saying that you shouldn't have to go to school. But I think you should. So, I'm putting disagree. Okay, wait. Yes. All people have their rights, but it's better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Well, do they mean like boys and girls locker rooms? Is that what this question's about? I'm pretty sure that's what it's referring to. I do think boys and girls should have different um locker rooms, generally speaking. So I'm gonna put strongly agree. Yeah. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Um, Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Let me think about this for a second. No, I don't think so. Okay. It depends. It depends. I don't have a son, and I do think it's slightly gendered, like in terms of the child, because I think that you get different behavior. I think you need to find them better outlets, which they most people don't. I think in most cases you don't have a good you there's not actually like I got spanked as a child and it was always for really dumb stuff like oh because I like spilt milk on somebody's thing and they were pissed so they spanked and that's why. So it was never done in a like in a rational way. There was like in most cases where I've heard of other people experiencing spanking and stuff, they basically said the same thing. Where it was never a rational decision. It was just that the parent was pissed off, and that was it. So I think like I've never heard of it done in a way that worked. So I'm gonna do strongly disagree. Um, it's natural for children to keep some secrets. Yeah, always. I kept loads. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Okay, so I don't think marijuana is like I don't think marijuana is a very interesting drug at all. I think it's very oversold. I think because it was illegal for a long time. I don't know what the exact reasoning and logic for it being illegal was. I think maybe it does make people lazy and not really work that hard most of the time for most people who do it. So like there are lots of negative effects and it's believed that it affects memory and stuff in a way too. But like if you're going to sell cigarettes and alcohol and stuff, I think cigarettes and alcohol are much worse for you. Um, uh, okay. So, possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. The thing is, in most places, it's legal now anyway. It's just that it doesn't really matter that much. I think it's very small potatoes. One, um, I think because of alcohol and tobacco, I think it doesn't matter. It's kind of like it's a nothing burger. Marijuana is barely a drug at all anyway. It's like I mean it is, but like you know, it's not more fun than like I get smoking and drinking at the same time, getting the double buzz on with your cigarette in one hand and the alcohol in the other. That is better than smoking marijuana, in my opinion, in terms of the neurological effects that it has on your brain. And like I don't think marijuana is more extreme than that. Really, I think it's very oversold. Um, I think marijuana has its own slew of negative effects, but I think marijuana is just boring. It's like it's the most boring drug in my opinion. It might actually be the most boring and the one that is the least interesting to take in any way. Um, so possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Agree. I'm going to put right. Next one. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. Um, this is why, people, the history of schooling is just this. This is why they did it. But like, I think what happened over time, I don't know what it's like in America, but I think in Europe it's very well understood that that the prime function of schooling is just daycare, while parents are earning money, which is terrible. Like, hardly any kids leave having learnt anything really, and that's the big failure of schools is that they. It's not even the case that schools taught them how to think because it didn't, or taught them how to read because it didn't. Because a lot of kids leave who could have learned how to read or like write or do basic arithmetic and stuff, but they can't because the schools failed them, and that's very common. And actually, just being able to do some basic things would make it way easier to find a job. And so I think obviously it should be the main goal. I think I strongly agree with that one. People with serious disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. This one is this one's tricky because with modern medicine, there's actually a lot of other possibilities. I won't go into them in lots of detail, but like the sort of Gattaca. You remember Gattaca the movie? We can do a lot of that stuff now because it depends what the inherited disability is, but a lot of inherited disabilities are like not guaranteed to be passed on, or like maybe only some of your sperm or eggs will have it and things. So it's like you can do things like IVF or whatever if you believe that IVF is morally acceptable or whatever. But like I think like people with serious disabilities should not be allowed to like strongly disagree. Should not be. I'm getting really confused by the negatives. The fact that basically all the questions are negatives and not positives because I have to reverse them in my head. But anyway, people with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. So I'm saying that they should be. I disagree. Somebody comes up to me and they says, I think people, I believe that you should just ban people from breeding, and I go, I disagree. So yeah, the most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. I think this is, I think it just depends. It depends on the kid and what they want to be and what they want to do. I think like really hard graining discipline to everybody is very boring. I think there are some kids that really benefit from it and some kids that don't. So I'm gonna say uh, that I strongly disagree with it, or maybe at least disagree with it, because I think it helps and I think it doesn't for different cases, and I think it does depend on um, the situation. So there's always nuance to these things. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only cultures, different cultures. Well, but that's what that means. A savage is. This is what I mean by loaded and leading and stuff, because it's saying that, like, because I would have said that a savage people has a bad culture, right? But this question's using savage to not refer to culture at all. So what is it even like savage and what's it even referring to? I don't even know what it's referring to. Um, so I I'm gonna put strongly disagree anyway because the question's dumb and I hate the question so much that I I I I can't actually wrap my head around it. I'm just saying that I'm disagreeing with the premise of the question, which is not going to help me because they're going to assume that I'm having a actual emotional. Well, the thing is, it said not to think about them too much. The reason, like, maybe I'm supposed to put strongly disagree because I don't like the question. or whatever. I don't know, but like, yeah, I'm just I'm shaking my head. I'm shaking my head a lot. This is why I hate the political compass test. Um, okay, those who are able to work and refuse should not expect study support. I think like who can even judge this, and that's why having the welfare state is kind of bad in a way, like arguably, because and the other thing is that like, well, I don't even know if that's true. Like some people would argue, not necessarily me, but some people would argue that before welfare we had like families taking care of each other and like villages that were much more uh like like cohesive and so on. And I think that people um like helped each other out and stuff, but people would have been more inclined to be pushed into work rather than anything else. I think we need to push people into work who refuse to work um to a degree, because otherwise they're just taking up resources, right? Which means that uh I think my strong answer is those who are able to work and refuse should not. I agree that they shouldn't, because we need to come up with a better solution, which that isn't just a handout, right? That's why I agree that we should not. We shouldn't be automatically. But what is support? I might be heading to disagree, because I think the government should even have facilities for getting people into work if they really refuse the opportunity. Which means that although I think actually I know for a fact that these don't work though. Like in Europe, we've got lots of um, government agencies which try and get people into work who are refusing to work essentially, um, and they basically just in most cases don't really work that well. They do get a small like number of unemployed people into work. Okay, so it's another question that I really hate, and I don't really know, like it's too loaded, so I don't know how to answer it safely or fairly. um, those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society support. Okay, right. Let's try and get this straight. I think they should not expect it, but we should give it to them anyway. That's my final one. So I'm going to put strongly agree. Right. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. This does kind of work, but not really. Actually, I can't. It like it, this one. You have to think about it a bit rationally at times. Whatever the thing is that troubles you, like say if you have some kind of illness or whatever, you have to think about it rationally and not in a really emotional way most of the time to try and get by. So, and I think that's difficult, but like, um, it is, in my opinion, a good idea to keep yourself busy with more cheerful things. That sounds very un-Buddhist of me, but I'm basically saying like, oh, you should watch VTubers or whatever, right? That's my strongly agree. If you are somebody who is troubled and you don't know what else to do, you can just watch VTubers. Um, okay. Um, First generation immigrants can never fully integrate with any country. This is basically always true. Um, they're too bought already, usually by the previous culture they were in, and they don't never really fully commit because of that. There are, I think, sometimes people go really hard the other way, but they still like there are certainly immigrants who are first generation who seem to be it seems to be reasonably well integrated, but I think that the problem is they still have the mindset of their previous culture uh, to a large extent, and it never really goes away fully. Even if you like, but I've known a lot of first generation immigrants who've basically just moved to a different country and gone, oh, this place is so much better than the country I was born in. But 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 that's the other problem, is that they also have that sort of mindset too, where they don't look at it as their country, they look at it as a different country still. And yeah, so they're never fully the same. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. That's a really dumb question, really, because corporations are made out of people. Yeah, mind blown, right? Corporations are not distinct individuals. So basically, all corporations is a collection of people who do work inside the corporation, and they're not evil. And ultimately, what's good for most successful corporations in order to keep their workers healthy and happy and working well is going to be the same as everybody else, more or less, which is to have some water, have some sleep, watch some VTubers. You can do that while you're in a corporation if you want, or your corporation can, market its own VTubers or whatever, and ultimately, that's going to be pretty good for everybody, I think. If they're talking about like pouring oil down the well because you got oil and you need not oil but like toxic waste. Let's say you're a corporation, you have toxic waste and you want to pour it down the well because you don't care about people because you're evil corporation, evil. That's not good for your corporation anyway, really, because you're just going to make all your workers sick and shit. So that's like completely dumb as hell. Um, No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I think uh, people. It is social engineering. This is a social engineering question, right? Because the whole point of having broadcasting institutions is kind of similar to something like US aid, right? Where the idea is to try and sell, say, Americanism, um, and like people don't realize that there's a lot of public funding in a lot of countries that goes towards broadcasting in other places in order to try to sell um, your culture on other people in a similar way that you might be selling arms or whatever. Then you might be selling like the idea that being, uh, you know, being American is really awesome or whatever, right? So that's what you know. But it's not going to be like in that case. It's not going to be very independent, is it? I think the thing is, right, the thing with the BBC, the BBC is an example that would fit into this as a broadcasting institution that is quite public and also independent theoretically, but is also not fully independent. And I think that at this point in time, it's very difficult to make an argument for the BBC. I would have made an argument in favor of the BBC in the past, but at the moment I can't really make one because I never watch the BBC anymore, because even though I used to like the BBC's programming decades ago, I don't feel like they have good programming in the modern world. And also I don't think that like in the modern world NPR and PBS are really providing anything anymore at this point. I think that's basically just over. I think like they really are relics. All of the public institutions are relics. All the broadcasting institutions are relics unless they are very modernized, um, and most of them are not really. So, um, well, with streaming and stuff, we have like the BBC makes streaming content too these days because they know that like a lot of people, younger people, are not going to watch uh, the old-fashioned BBC broadcasting radio stations and television stations and so on. So, no broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Okay, I think that in the modern world, there's not a very strong argument to do this anymore. In fact, I would say the only use case I can think of for publicly funding a broadcasting institution is if it was not independent at all. Right? Like, say, if you were trying to do the BBC World Service, which was mostly about marketing Britishness to overseas people, or you've got like US aid, which is kind of a similar concept, and like other, like, I'm sure the Americans also broadcasting radio overseas in an attempt to try to spread an American way of thinking to peoples around the world at different points in history. I'm pretty sure that has happened as well in the 20th century. I mean, at least I know the British were doing it quite a lot. I'm sure the Americans are doing it too. But and I don't think that's necessarily a problem. So okay, so we can ignore the independent part like entirely because that clause does not do anything in the sentence, like as far as I'm concerned. So, no broadcast institution should receive public funding. The answer to that is I disagree because I think that there's a million cases where it does actually do good around the world in my opinion. Right. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Um, yeah, I mean, this is the 9/11 one. I think the answer to this is there's a lot of crazy shit that goes on that people don't really know about. And I'm more civil. I It's not just counterterrorism, but that's part of it. Um, so I think I agree that they are being excessively curbed. I also don't like the way these questions are worded. Anyway, a significant advantage of a one party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. Okay. A significant advantage of a one party state is that it avoids all of the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. What? I don't know how to answer this. I mean, I agree that that would happen. An advantage of a one party system state is that it avoids arguments that delay progress. Well, no, because it wouldn't. Because I can basically. Okay, I think there's an argument to be made that this might not fix things much. There's certainly one party states where they've had lots of disagreements inside the single party, and I think that's basically where you get to when you, like, whether it's in China or in Germany or whatever, you basically just end up with lots of disagreement at different levels to do with how things should be done. And having a single party doesn't fix things in that way, like, not entirely anyway. It's a very silly question. Like, whoever wrote this is very silly. Like, they thought they were being clever, but I don't think it's clever. I just think it's stupid. Right. A, a significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. I mean, yeah, the problem here is it's like Putin said, right? Because in America, you end up with a different president every week, and then, well, yeah, and then you basically anything that Putin agrees on the president with at the time, the president changes. He's still there decades later. Different presidents coming and going all the time. Different political parties coming and going, and they all have different opinions. And even like one party might have one opinion about something one year, and then the next year they have a completely different opinion about the same thing, and they basically just won't even admit that their opinion has completely shifted. And meanwhile, Putin is still there with all the exact same opinions he's always had since the 80s, like probably, or even earlier, and he's basically just hasn't changed even slightly as a person since then, and everybody else has completely changed. And you even get like people coming back later into politics, and Putin might see them like in other countries, and their opinions have completely shifted since they've come back, and Putin's are still identical to what they were, and yeah. So the advantage is that like having one person, it's like playing a video game, right? Playing a video game with tons of people with shifting opinions who can't like think one thing one day, then another thing the other day, and you've got millions of people like that in politics around the world, and it's just kind of a nightmare scenario. It's a wonder anything gets done. Anyway, although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Well, I'm going to say strongly disagree because I think they will find a reason. Everybody breaks law all the time. That's not quite true, but like pretty much everybody has at least broken some kind of civil. Well, take like you could make the argument if somebody uploads a video on YouTube, and this might depend on your region, but theoretically, if somebody uploads a video to YouTube, um, you could be liable for copyright infringement by downloading it, even if you're just watching it in your browser, if you did not have access to the copyright, like if you had no copyright permission to watch it, basically is what I'm saying. So I'm talking about piracy. If somebody uploaded a video which you're not allowed to watch because it's pirated, then technically watching it is also a form of piracy and could get you in trouble. And if you have lots of surveillance, you might have people getting in trouble en masse for doing things like that, which to me are like so minor, it's not even worth the government's time trying to catch people or whatever. But um, yeah, I don't know. So uh, only wrong. I think the only wrongdoers need to be worried thing. I think it's incorrect because I think everybody needs. I think they will find a reason to get you anyway, whether you've done anything wrong or not. Um, the death penalty should be an option for most serious crimes. Um, yeah, I think so. I think sex crimes in general, if they're like um whoever they're against and whoever they're by, I think like I'm basically fine. Although, I mean, the problem here is that you don't know, you still don't know. Like, the biggest problem that we have is that there's so many cases of false, like, and I know that people don't like to admit this, but there's so many cases of false allegations and and so on. It's very hard to be sure that somebody even did a thing. Um, because there are lots of people who end up in jail. I'm sure even on death row, there have been people who have been killed who haven't done anything wrong at all. They were just accused a bunch and then they ended up on death row. I'm sure that's happened a few times. Um, and so, um, you know, I think as technology improves, this has to be an agree. Maybe not a strongly agree, but I think we're not likely to either. At least in somewhere like Europe or Australia, I think the chances of this coming about are quite slim. Um, Anyway, in a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. I mean, yeah, there's always hierarchies and there's always pecking orders, and there's some people who are better at leading and there's some people who are better at being led. That's just the way it is. Abstract art doesn't represent anything, shouldn't be considered art at all. Uh, I loathe abstract art. I loathe it so hard because it's so fake. Abstract art is fake. Everybody knows that. It's fake as hell. Well, you could argue that about any art, right? Because it's definitely the case that art critics rate things more highly if they think that they're gonna get some kind of benefit out of it, like whether it's social or financial or anything. And basically, it's all fake anyway. Like the whole art snobbery scene. There was some guy in yeah. I recommend watching F for Fake by Orson Welles. That is a film about the art world and it will blow your mind a bit. And it's one of the best films ever made. I think. I think like he had two bangers because he had F of Fake and he had you know Orson. Sorry, he had Citizen Kane as well, and they're both excellent movies. And yeah, you should definitely watch both. Abstract art doesn't represent anything; it shouldn't be considered art at all. I strongly agree. Uh, my only argument is that I'm not. I mean, there are other forms of art I think that you could also make similar arguments about. Um, in criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I think it depends who what you did. I don't. I think there's a level of crime where I don't care about rehabilitation anymore, or don't think that you're probably salvageable. If you're a serial killer, I would like no matter how hard you try to be rehabilitated, you probably are just going to do the same thing again. But probably the vast majority of criminals have done quite minor things. So if you're doing minor things, I think basically the conclusion I come to is that um, I don't think the punishment aspect works that well because criminals are recidivists mostly, which means that they redo crimes anyway. So if somebody is a rapper, for example, then they will rap when they get out of prison as well, and they're just going to do the same thing again. So and that happens so much that it's very hard to uh you know, it doesn't work as either. This is the problem, right? Because I want a hard focus on rehabilitation so that they don't commit the crimes again. And I don't think it works as a deterrent. So I think you basically have to focus on rehabilitation. But at the moment, neither really work that well, and I think that's how it's going to be. I don't actually think that situation is going to improve much unless we have some sort of nerve staple or something like that, where some kind of physical thing we can do to stop them misbehaving so much. Um, but I would say that that is also a form of rehabilitation, not more than punishment. It's a waste of time to try and rehabilitate some criminals. I mean, yeah, it is actually. I just said that. Um, the business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. What? I think. Okay, this is like the Apple. I'm gonna use Apple as an example, right? Because um, Steve Jobs is a business person, or sorry, was because he died ages ago. Steve Jobs is a business person and and I wouldn't say manufacturer, but he arranged manufacturing to happen. I guess you could say Apple is a manufacturer of sorts, although they don't run any factories themselves. They don't facture much, but they you know, actually I think they are making factories for chips and stuff, or at least they have. Maybe they bought some from somebody else, but the point is that the writer and the artist at Starbucks with their really bad, like if they have no accent. Oh god, is wait a minute, is the business person manufacturer referring to somebody the writer and the artist might be using or not in this case? I don't actually know what it's referring to. It's such a weird, it's a misleading question. But what I would say is that um I think in the grand scheme of things, they're both equally important. I think that's basically it. I think the fact that I'm not allowed to choose that is aggravating. But I'm going to put an slight agree. I think writers and artists do actually, or rather, I think. I think the thing is, I generally have the opinion that art and writing have not improved much over time. That's my general opinion. You can disagree with that. That doesn't mean that great works still don't exist, but I think the great works of today and the great works of like centuries ago are like there's some build upon there where like Beethoven, like even Beethoven, whose music is quite complicated, I think it's also surprisingly simplistic in many ways compared to later classical music composers. And I think they definitely ripped him off and then did something similar, but then added to it, which means they did build upon it. And in manufacturing, there's always improvements, though it's much more blatantly obvious that there's always improvements. But I would still say that something like the Ninth Symphony by Beethoven is better than anything that's been made recently that I'm aware of, even though I like some more modern music. But and I would also say something similar with somebody like William Shakespeare, which is that I think there hasn't been a huge amount of improvement in many ways. I think they realized that it's better to like because Shakespeare said that brevity is the soul of wit, but then all of his plays are too long, right? He really needed somebody to edit them down, but maybe that was part of the selling point when he was having them performed and so on, was that they would be a very particular length and so on. Um, so I'm going to say partial agree. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I think, yeah, it makes me a traditionalist, but I think I'm actually going very strongly agree. I Mothers are amazing. I think mothers are the best thing in the world. I think everybody loves their mother, which some people's mothers are really terrible, but I think that mothers underestimate how important they are to the functioning of society, and that you could argue that we haven't been doing enough to support mothers, maybe, or to encourage people to be mothers, or to say that actually mothers are pretty amazing, actually, to women. I think women are generally feel that they've been taught that being a businesswoman is way more interesting and important and fulfilling than being a mother, but it is not. Like, I don't think being a businessman is more important than being a father, actually. Uh, but there is an implication here, which is that whoever wrote this comes from the time when there still were quite a lot more homemakers, generally, that were mothers and that stayed at home a lot um, while they had kids, because that was still a very common thing. Um, and I think it's increasingly less and less common, just because because more women work, it means that all women need to work, which means that there's no time to have kids, which means that you can't really be a homemaker, and you basically have to put your kids into care when they're young, and so on, so you can go back to work and earn money, which is very rough. Also, I'm definitely not going to redo this test like I said I was at the start, because I'm never going to finish it at this rate. So, yeah, almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate science that growth is detrimental to efforts to curb global warming. I actually don't really care about global warming that much, like these days. I think the plastic in the ocean is way worse than the. I think global warming is a bit oversold. The big problem is a lot of European countries, especially, have basically just signed their death warrants on the idea of having net zero carbon emissions by certain dates and so on. And it's absolutely absurd because individually they're all minor producers of carbon in the world and will have negligible effect individually. You could argue that all the different European countries might have more and stuff, but there are larger countries that output way more carbon and that nobody's stopping them anytime soon, and if it is the big issue people say it is, then it's just going to stay anyway. um but we're in the West, we're going to sacrifice our economic growth for global, just in case global warming might happen, but nobody else is going to do it. Well, they are, but I mean, it depends whose perspective we're talking about this from, right? Because some countries are trying to do things and some are doing less. Um, but the ones that need to be doing more are the ones that are doing not enough and aren't going to be doing enough anytime soon. And nobody's able to convince them otherwise. And it's not actually going to change. So, if global warming has ever been a thing that is a genuine risk, it's going to stay that way, um, unless we come up with some new technology which cleans up the atmosphere, which we probably will be able to soon. I think there are actually some prospects in that direction which look like they might be viable. So I think that's actually what we're going to do if things get that bad. So almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate scientists that growth is detrimental to disagree. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I think kind of not really. I think it depends if they're a bunch of scumbags or not. Make peace? I don't think so. I think you need to realize that for the most part all people are self-serving, or they're not really altruistic in what they're trying to achieve. Even whether they're part of the establishment or not, they're probably not actually thinking about it in terms of, oh, this will help the country the most. They're probably thinking about things in terms of how it will help them the most individually. And I think that's a failure. That's the biggest failure of civilization, I guess, is that individuals are very selfish still anyway. And even in very, you could argue, even in very rather group based rather than individual based societies, that's still kind of true anyway to a degree. I think basically what this comes down to is that you shouldn't really make peace with them. There's no real need to make it but I don't know what that means. I don't in practice I don't really know what it's asking me to say. But let's see. Okay, 5. This is going to be so long. This video is getting really really long. Okay, right. If that got you to find these, oh god, religion. Astrology accurately explains many things. Strongly disagree. You cannot be moral without being religious. It depends what you think morality is, but generally, yeah, I think so. But look, the problem is here is it depends what your definition of religion is, because you could always that whether you believe in a religion or not, there definitely are religions that are made up that aren't really cults, but they are made up. Or you could make that you might believe that all religions are made up. You can believe whatever you want, but you I think it depends what you mean by like. I think it means objective morality. I think there is a strong argument that to be objectively moral, you need a religious foundation, and that's just basically saying that God says you shouldn't be killing people, so therefore that's the only real morality. Because otherwise, it's just your opinion, man. Which is kind of true, though. That's kind of the problem because it just becomes a preference at that point. And this argument is just me repeating something that somebody else said. Um, but in general, I think that it's basically correct. But it doesn't make you immoral, though. It makes you amoral. People argue about the difference between amoral and immoral. But, like, look, what I'm saying here is I'm not saying that you're immoral by being irreligious. I'm saying that you're being amoral by being irreligious because you have no morals, because you don't believe morals are even real, really. And that's the problem, is that, like, really you need a foundation, and like religion isn't even that good a foundation either, realistically, because you basically have to just sort of axiomatically say that religion is objective because you believe it is objective, which means that you can make up your own religion and say it's objective fact, and then say that, okay, now that we have objective fact, you can have morality based on objective fact, or you can just believe that there's no such thing as objective reality, or uh, or that morality is just opinions or whatever. The thing is that people who are religious are necessarily, in many cases, going to not use their religion as their foundation of their morality anyway, or maybe they just won't really have much of a foundation of their morality, even though they claim to be religious. That happens a lot too. Um, so I think the answer to this is I'd probably say agree a bit. Charity is better than social security as a means of helping. I think this goes back to what I was saying, because I was kind of arguing that point earlier, that I think David Cameron said this too, the pig fucker guy. Basically, he said, like, in the big society, we will have villages where everybody takes care of each other and you don't need a welfare state. And I go, that sounds very nice, but that kind of was what it was a bit like. I don't know if it ever worked that well, but, like, it depends when you have, like, I think when your society is over a certain number of people, that doesn't work as well. Um, and you know, it's like there are too many homeless people now that it's like kind of hard to do it. It's kind of hard to do it as as charity only, just because there's so many. Uh, I don't know if it's better. Mm, I haven't. Okay, I'm gonna put disagree. I think. I think it. I hate this question because I think it can be. I think ideally, I think we need to create the society where, like, I would see us rather create a society where we don't really need this bit to make this work. Like, that's what I want. I don't think this social security is not sustainable, in my opinion. Like, I don't think it makes any sense. I think it's basically just like making up something that will work temporarily that definitely isn't designed to work in the long term. So, um, I think in the long term, I think we're going to see basically that this will fail. That's my opinion. So I'm actually going to change that to a strongly agree. Some people are naturally unlucky. I don't believe in luck. I am not superstitious. You make your own luck, like in the Dark Knight. Do you remember that bit in the Dark Knight? Anyway, it's important that my child's school instills religious values. Um, this one's a hard one because I think as a younger person, I would have said it's religious values. I think most people, I think, okay, what happened to me is I went to a school in the UK at a time where it was very normal for um, British schools to try to instill Protestant Christian values into the children. I think they could have even gone a bit harder with it, but they were kind of worried increasingly about people who weren't Christian, Protestant, from, like alienating them, and also try and provide a school for everybody. And then the kind of religious aspect kind of died down a lot. And because it kind of turned out, well, my understanding, unless it was just my school, because my school was just a regular state-run school. But my understanding at the time was that all the schools in Britain were basically like that at that time, which is that they would basically tell you that you were supposed to be Christian, and then you could reject it or not at your whim. But that would just be the way it went. And like, there's been like people like John Cleese in interviews who's complained a lot about that, basically saying that he felt, in the end, he felt like it pushed him away more. I think, just because of the way it was done. I think for most people, it does help them. I think some people may even become less religious by poor attempts at doing this, and poor attempts at doing this are common. Um, so I'm gonna put a mild agree, except that this isn't gonna happen. Like nobody, like I think most modern schools don't even do this anymore. At least in places that I'm aware of. I think it's basically just being kicked to the side because there's too much variety in now. Whereas in the past everybody was more homogenous, and it worked back then when doing this. But like, you know, uh, oh god, sex outside marriage is usually immoral. I think that it depends. The problem with this one is that like it depends. I don't think it matters, right? It depends what you're doing. It's such a vague question. I think the answer to this is like it's your responsibility if you're going to have sex to make sure that you don't pass on your gametes to your partner. If you're a guy, I mean, or to get pregnant, right? So I think like you can't put it on the other person's shoulders, because I think in a lot of people's minds the idea of having casual sex is that you'll basically just assume that the other partner is taking responsibility, because there are rational arguments you can make for why the whole pregnancy side of thing is the woman's responsibility and their fault, or you could make arguments that it's from a female perspective that it's all a male's fault, right? So in which case, both sides are being immoral in a way, because they're just like they don't want to have a child, but they've kind of ended up having one anyway. Um, most There are lots of forms of contraception that work very well, and condoms are not really one of them. Um, but there's other ones. Well, you could just fool around and not actually do penetration, which is like probably preferential for. Like, I think I'd like to almost see. Now, I don't want to get into this. This is a weird topic. I think the answer to this is like it might actually be the case for different reasons, or for a different reason, which is that there are a lot of people who cheat still in the modern world, and cheating is immoral because you've agreed to not do it, and then now you are doing it. Um, but it depends whose morality we're comparing it to, because I'm not like, are we talking about their morality, or are we talking about some kind of objective morality? If we believed in a form of objective morality, right? Um, so like, see, I said at the start that I was going to answer these according to my own thoughts, and the reason that I've been taking so long on each one and then switching is because it genuinely don't have opinions on most of these things, even though I've thought about all of them a lot over the course of my life. Like, is this actually immoral? Like, genuinely, is it? Is it? If you're not causing any harm to anybody, then no. But in reality, people are causing harm to other people because they're not being careful enough, which means maybe it is immoral, actually. It just depends how we process the question, which means that, like, I'm going to put a mild disagree, but, like, I think it's, like, on the line. It's on the line. It would be neutral if they had a neutral, but they don't. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. I think it's complicated. This one's complicated as well. I think that the rules for adoption there's so many people who want to adopt. I think it depends where you are, but I know that in some countries it can be quite difficult to get approval for adoptions and things. Um, but the thing is, I think it's probably okay, but it needs a lot of monitoring. I think all forms, but this is not specific to this part because I'm basically just saying that I think if you're adopting children, you really need to be much more careful about it, which to a degree. But I think like it's best not to think about it too much. Um, I agree that they shouldn't automatically be excluded, but I would okay. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. I mean, like, probably. I don't actually know. I don't know with this one either whether it's good or not. I think there's lots of negatives that have come from having easy access to pornography, but I also think in the modern world, particularly with AI and stuff, you can basically just generate mountain like if you really want right now, you can just generate hours and hours and hours of pornography using quite cheap AI tools that are freely, not freely, well, and maybe there may be free ones too. I don't know, but I'm just saying it's very easily accessible and easily available these days, um, more so than ever. But it's not depicting consenting adults. That's why this is old because it's before AI, and they don't realize that you can have depicting adults without the consenting part because they're not real. Um, should it be legal? I'm going to say yes, but I don't know if it is good for society or not. But I don't think it should be restricted. What goes on in private bedrooms? Yeah, pretty much. Any private, anything, consenting adults, anything for me is probably fine as long as you're not causing harm to anybody. Um, in most cases, no one can feel naturally homosexual. Uh, um, no one can feel naturally homosexual. Okay, I'm going to put strongly disagree there because I think you're attracted to who you're attracted to a degree. Like the cause of that. I think the argument people would use these days, like maybe if you're a Christian or whatever, they might say, "Oh well, maybe feeling homosexual is a test or something like that." Um, maybe in which case you can. So okay, this is a negative, right? Negative, negative. So let's go to the nose. It says one can feel naturally homosexual. I'm saying agree. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I don't really think so. You might agree or disagree with the internet. The problem is with this one is like this is very early internet idea question. I think because maybe that's where they first came up with this question is in 2001. Um, these days, openness about sex has gone too far. I think the answer to that is probably not really. People don't realize that like their grandmother had sex as well. I know it's shocking to think about, isn't it? Your grandmother had sex as well, right? Yeah. The thing is, people have always been like, I think it's funny seeing the way people like the idea that we've become more tawdry over time as a populace about sexual stuff is kind of baloney to me. I don't think it's changed. People don't change. It's just the way people look at their parents and at their grandparents and go, "Oh, they don't even have sex probably," and then like they had sex once to have me and that was it. And they did it when blindfolds and in the dark and stuff. And but that's not actually accurate. It's genetically and socially they're very similar to you anyway, and they probably just would have been into the things that you were into. So like if you're into various taboos or whatever, then chances are your parents like those as well. I'm not saying you should ask them, but I'm saying that I don't think things have changed as much as you probably think. You could make the argument that social media has meant it. Well, no, because it's the same because like things don't change as much as you think they change. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's changed. These days, openness about sex guns for strongly disagree. The reason I'm saying it's I don't think it's changed. I actually think, in a way, there's because of the birth rate being low, there's a very strong argument to be made that maybe people aren't being openly sexual enough, maybe, and I don't know why that is. I actually think that I think Gen Z, I think the upcoming generations after millennials have gotten much more squeamish about sex, particularly, and yeah, it's just something I noticed online generally. Is I think that maybe it's because of too much internet exposure, but they become more puritanical, if anything. Anyway, let's see where I stand. I'm also not redoing it. So where do I stand? Where do I stand? Ah, wow. Okay. Economic left right 3.63. Social libertarian, authoritarian. Wait, does that mean? Oh, that means I'm authoritarian. That means I'm authoritarian. I'm not surprised that I came up with that. When I did this last time, which was decades ago, but I'm pretty sure I was around here. Like, basically the same amount of right, but libertarian, more libertarian. Like, I was like, no government, no government, no government. Um, and also I was more, no church in schools, no church in schools. Whereas now I'd be more like, it's probably not that bad a thing. So, yeah, basically, very. I don't. Wait. Okay, 363. I want to see how that compares. 363. I want to see how it compares to other people. Is there a way? I thought they had examples where you could see other historical figures. Maybe there is a way. I don't know. Okay, so. Oh. Since Switzerland is like crazy right, libertarian, that might even be the case. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about this. This. I'm getting tired now because I've been going on too long. The starting point of the original political compass was in 2001 when we recognized the inadequacies of the standard political left and right. Because it's certainly fine for discussing economics, but to this day, it widely and wrongly used to describe social attitudes. France's National Front, for example, is popularly described as far right, yet its economic policies have been sometimes been on the left. That's very true. A lot of the far right parties have quite left wing economic beliefs, more left wing than I do. So that's why I can't be far right. By being far right on the thing, even though I'm not far right, I'm kind of like center right. But if I was far right, most far right people, according to the media, are actually much more economically left wing than I am. Just something to bear in mind. Um, I really did think that there was a list of famous politicians. Doesn't matter. It's probably on a different page. But yeah, so that's it. I did it. I did it. I came out with a fairly piss weak score. Um, I'm not redoing the test because I've gone on too long. If this was a shorter video, I definitely would have gone on for longer. I think there's been some interesting discussions and stuff. I think generally speaking that you should just have your own opinions about stuff. I mean, you can talk about them with other people, but people shouldn't get so butthurt when people have different political opinions from them. But I guess that's how wars start and so on, isn't it? Really, we just say like, oh, maybe you should just murder people who you disagree with, and yeah. Um, so yeah, that's been me. I'm Crosmatron or Crosmatron, and I'm just gonna say,